Rhett wants to know, do you have any tips for installing oval chain rings and fine-tuning the front derailleur for their use? With more and more riders making the switch to oval chain rings, this question is coming up a lot these days. But before we dive in, it should be noted that front shifting with oval chain rings isn't quite on par with the round chain rings, so even with these tips, which will help a lot, you should temper your expectations. Nearly every oval chainring front derailleur setup can benefit from a shim placed between the frame brazon and the front derailleur, but a chain catcher is still highly recommended. The shim angles the rear of the derailleur down and moves it back to help clear the taller rings while putting the cage in a better position to push the chain down to the small chainring. Both SRAM and Rotor make these types of shims. Here's an example of what the Rotor shims look like. The larger one is for their QXL chain rings and the smaller one is for their regular Q rings. They are easy to install because the tuning process is essentially the same as a round chainring setup. Start by shifting the front derailleur into the small chainring and then loosen the cable anchor bolt. Put the derailleur into a position that places the outer plate on the derailleur as close to the tallest tooth on the ring as possible without it touching, while making sure the outer cage is parallel to the big chainring unless it's a SRAM yaw front derailleur. Torque the derailleur fixing bolt down to spec. Set your lower limit screw so that when the derailleur is shifted into the large cog, the inside of the derailleur cage is as close as possible to the chain without it touching. Then pull the cable tight and torque the cable fixing bolt down to spec. Shift the rear derailleur into the middle of the cassette and then shift the front derailleur into the big ring. If the front derailleur is struggling to push the chain up to the big chain ring, you'll need a little more cable tension. Use your barrel adjuster to do this. If you don't have a barrel adjuster, then you'll have to tighten the cable at the cable anchor. Shift the rear derailleur to the smallest cog and check to see if the chain is rubbing on the cage of the derailleur. If it is, back out the outer limit screw. You want the outer part of the derailleur cage as close to the chain as possible without rubbing. If the derailleur is shifting into the big ring just fine, check to make sure that your limit screw is tightened down until it bottoms out on the derailleur. This will prevent it from overshifting and causing the chain to fall off the outside of the big ring. With the high limit set, back it off just a quarter turn to allow the derailleur to barely overshift and push the chain to the big ring just a little quicker. Perform some front derailleur test shifts while the rear derailleur is shifted into a variety of gears in the back. You may want to fine-tune your cable tension and limit screws after performing these test shifts just to make sure your shifting is as good as it can be. If you want your question asked on Ask a Mechanic presented by Art Cyclery, send your inquiry to webletters@competitorgroup.com.